Hey, we've been looking at the book of Ephesians for the last couple of months, and so we're going to carry on in the verses there in chapter 4. And it's interesting, sometimes, and it's neat how God works, where Bryce and I, we didn't collaborate on sermon and class, but he was teaching his Acts class out of Acts chapter 5, talking about the beginning of the threats to the church, that there have always been threats to the church. And you see that for the first time in Acts chapter 5. And you think about threats to the church, those things are real. There have always been two things. There have always been threats to the church, and there's always been forces at work to diminish or water down or destroy the faith of those in the church. And one major factor in that is what I would call a faith that is the forces of darkness and the world and Satan. They want to create those that are in the church to have maybe be in the church, but to end up with a faith that has no impact on daily life. A faith that is just social, or it's just secular, or it just really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't do anything. It just it's like you carry a card, in a wallet that says I belong to X club, but you never attend. It has zero impact. And we see from Scripture that that's exactly opposite of what God intends for those that belong to Him. And as the book of Ephesians lays out for us the beauty and the passion and the power of the body of Christ, the church, what it is to do and to be and how it lives, we will see that there is to be a taking off and a putting on in this passage so that we can lay aside the garment, as it were. We use that word picture of taking off the garment of the world so that we can put on the spiritual garment that the Lord intends for His people to wear. And so let's read through this again. I appreciate Mike for reading this a minute ago for us. Let's read it one more time. He says, so Paul says this, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you no longer live as the Gentiles. No longer means they once did, right? And he says, you got to stop doing that. Maybe that's the way you used to be, but our used to was in the world is not our now is in Christ. To butcher the English language, which I tend to do on purpose. Okay, so he says, don't live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. He's going to, through the first 3 verses, describe the dark side. And then contrast that in the last 5 verses with the light side, the side of light and love and the Lord. So he says they're darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality and to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. And in those verses right there, you have a description of the spiritual state of the world that we are surrounded by and have come out of. And in that you see why we can't go back there. You remember when God brought through the mighty hand of His miracles and the 10 plagues, all of that, He took the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt, and they crossed the Red Sea, and He gave them freedom, gave them law, and gave them covenant, and turned them into a nation, His people, from the old covenant years. And remember what He told them once they got out of Egypt? He said, don't ever go back there. Don't go back to Egypt. Why? Because Egypt was a representation of the chains of slavery. He says once you've been freed by God, don't go back into the slavery of sin. And He's telling us the same thing here. So here's now he's going to flip the script and show them the other side. That was the dark, now the light. He says he's talking to the Ephesian Christians, those that belong to Jesus or are in Christ, been saved by grace, as he talked about in chapter 2. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. You don't get to Jesus through the darkness of the world. You get out of the darkness of the world, not through it. Surely, here's how you did. You heard of Him and were taught in Him. In accordance with the truth, and look where the truth is. The truth is in Jesus. It's not in the world. It's not in some philosophy. It's not in some ism. It's not in some self-righteousness and acts of being so perfect and so good that you collect enough points to earn it. Already told us in chapter 2, you can't. He says the truth is in Jesus. You were taught. So there's got to be instruction and learning so that we can learn the truth of the gospel message. And that's what we talked about in chapter 3, that Jesus gave him the gospel and he wrote it down. So he says, now when you read, you can understand my insight. So we need to know it and study it. He says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life. That's your past. That's your used to was in the world of sin that he describes in the middle of chapter 2. To put off your old self like an old, raggedy, filthy, trash, nasty garment. Have God help you get out of the rags of the filth of sinful. Because that's what sin does. It destroys, it ruins, it corrupts on a deep, deep level. And he says, put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires. So it's not a neutral. It's not like, what's the harm in it? That's what the world would like to have us to believe. Oh, we say boys will be boys and just sow a few wild oats and it's just having fun and blah, 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 blah. To try to minimize and pretend as if sinfulness of the world has no consequence. But it does. It corrupts. It's acidic spiritually, and it corrodes and destroys what it touches. That's why it's to be rejected and gotten away from. He says, so you get away from that, you want to be made new in the attitude of your mind. You got to, like Romans 12, verse 1 and 2, you got to have a new attitude. Create a new way of thinking, a new perception and worldview. And to be put on. See, we've taken off the old, we're putting on what? The new self. You're going to get a new you in Jesus. Created, and this one is created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Infinitely better. Better result. Better substance. Better source. So, here's what he's saying in all of this. He says Paul is in this collection of verses here, about 8 verses. What he's doing is basically, as we said last week when we started chapter 4, in verse 1, he told them to walk a walk, which means live that daily life, in a way that is worthy of the gospel in which you were called. He said you can't just walk, you can't just live however you want, however the world would tell you to or decide for you. He said you got to walk worthy. And he's expanding in these verses on what does it mean to walk in that walk. So he's going to be actually, for most or all of the rest of the book of Ephesians, going to be elaborating on and expanding on chapter 4, verse 1. Well, that walk in that worthy walk. Because, see, it's practical. And it'll have to do with every aspect and every corner of your life. It'll deal with how you think, how you spend, how you talk, what you believe, how you parent, how you work, how you play, and everything else. So for us to walk a worthy walk, I got to choose the correct path. It's a decision. It's an act of will. That I've got to have this road or this road put in front of me. And it matters which one you take. And it'll require rejection of the wrong road. I've got to have my eyes open and to call things a spade and go, no, that's the road of darkness and death and sin headed toward hell. Like in Matthew 7, wide is the way that goes into destruction, and many go that way, but few there are that go to this other path, the straight and narrow. In verses 17 and 19, he will reveal the nature of the pagan road and why we've got to reject it. So that's really what it's about. So when we see for the first 3 verses, he describes the darkness. It's degenerative. It kind of goes from bad to worse in its description. And we see the accumulation of deterioration of sin. This degradation, as it says, caused by sin is characterized by the Gentiles, and it's seen in 9 specific areas in these 3 verses. So let's check those out. First of all, he says, here's what's wrong with it. Here's what's bad about the world. He says they're fruitless in their thinking. In verse 17, he says their thinking is futile. Their thought patterns are distorted so that the person then who's in this is manipulated by their passions. We're just led by our appetites. And the world says, if it feels good, exactly, you know how it goes. That's the world's thinking. You just, if my body wants it, if my appetites desire it, then why not? Go get it. But what if it is sinful or immoral or against God's will? Who cares? So what? Just make it, you deserve a break today. They have also, they called it in verse 18, obscured understanding. It says they're darkened in their understanding. And the Bible often, especially the writer John and also Paul, uses the contrast between darkness and light to illustrate sin in the Lord's way, in the light. We are to be people of the light. Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, the truth, and the light, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father but by me. And he calls us to the light. 1 John 1 says we are to walk in the light as he is in the light. And over again, this contrast of which way will you choose? Will you be, and since Jesus is the light, and we're to be his people, we're to be of the light as well. And so it matters how you live and where you go. But they live in darkness because they choose to in the world. Thirdly, he says they are alienated from life. It says of the world that they're separated from the life of God. That reflects what he said in chapter 2, verse 12. Where in those two verses there, verse 11 and 12 of chapter 2. It's also a description of lostness. You can go back over there and see that it also says the same thing in those verses. And they have no union with the source of life. God is the source of life. You aren't. I'm not. Nothing else in the world is. God is. And they have been separated, cut off by sin from that. And so cut off from the source of life means what? Death. If you have to be connected to something to be alive and you get separated and cut off from that, dead. Spiritually speaking, that's the problem with sin. It has eternal consequences. He says they're filled with ignorance. By that phrase, because of the ignorance that is in them. It matters what you know. He says they're not dumb or stupid. He's using the word there, ignorance, in the sense of agnosticism. They could know, but they don't. And they chose to ignore what they could have been aware of. Who cares? Don't want to know it. There's some apathy there. Perhaps there's some other things. And it's a spiritual blindness there. The scriptures will talk about elsewhere. Jesus talks about that at the end of John chapter 9. He heals a man from blindness, and he uses that to illustrate spiritual blindness of this kind of ignorance. I don't want to know. And it's basically putting spiritual blinders on yourself, lest you learn a truth that you'd rather pretend doesn't exist. And he says they have stony hearts. He said they're hardened in their hearts there. He says this indicates kind of a callousness. Hard-heartedness is used often in scriptures. Also with stiff neck, it means a stubbornness, an unwillingness to bend in humility or in submission to God. No, this is my life, this is my will, this is what I want. And they can become unfeeling and uncaring toward moral values and other people. He calls them emotionally insensitive. He says they've lost all sensitivity. Sometimes something can happen physically where you lose the ability to have. I read a book about a man who was a doctor dealing with leprosy in a leprosy colony, and it was called Pain. The book was called Pain, the Gift That Nobody Wants, because he learned from dealing with people who had this leprosy who lost the sensation of pain. They couldn't feel any hurt. You could just stick them and poke them and stab them, and they're like, what? And we would think, wow, that'd be great to not hurt anymore. And he found out, actually, no. Pain serves a purpose, very vital purpose. It's not fun, we don't enjoy it, but we need it. Because that sensitivity is a warning that means something's wrong, something needs repair, something needs attention, something needs to be fixed here. You need a doctor, you need surgery, you need bandages, you need splints, you need something, And if we ignore that, we do so to our peril. And they've lost the sensitivity, no conscience. The conscience has been seared and doesn't work. But the problem is, Man, we need our conscience because it says, stop, this is not right. And then he'll say they're submerged in sensuality. In the phrase, he says they've given themselves to sensuality. There's an abandonment, a wantonness, to a shameless quest for pleasure. You see that in society. Turn on the TV, the internet. You see this just trumpeted and heralded. Look at this, how great this is all the time. And he says they also have a total involvement in impurity. They indulge in every kind of impurity without any kind of ethical controls, unlimited devotion to what pleases the passions. We're just led by the passions. And again, this is on full display in culture often. And he says lastly that one of the problems is they're unable to be satisfied. They have a continual lust for more. There's never enough. You never get to a point where you say, yeah, I think I've sinned good enough. No, the body says more, 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 more. And it's like a snowball going down a hill. It picks up more and more and more and more. And so that's the dark side. And so you look at if you look at these 9 things, and you'll see that they affect the whole person. They deal with thinking, the mind, the intellect, the will, the emotions, the desires, affections, and passions. The whole self, every aspect is tainted. Every aspect is involved. And that's what the problem with the world is. It's like a poison or a virus, a spiritual virus that just infuses, infects, and messes up everything it touches. So it's not harmless, as the world would have you believe. It's not something that we can just go, that's just what they say. And so here's how it's looked at in this. Here's those verses on the left, and you can see all the things listed as the problem. And people in the world say, what's wrong with the world's way? Well, in the red there's what's wrong with it. It's not good. It's right. It's got to be actively and deliberately rejected. And we have to have a repulsion and a rejection of that. We can't play games with this or kind of just go, well, okay, maybe later when I'm older I'll deal with that or think about it. The stakes are too high. So it comes to this, where you've got to choose. We stand at a crossroads, and we've got to choose between what is right. And that reminds me of a poem by my favorite theologian, Dr. Seuss. What? He's awesome, okay? Because he can put things where I can understand it. Because he talks about this idea of standing at a crossroads, and you got to make a decision. And he reflects that in this poem called The Zode, and see what you think. Maybe you've been there where this guy was. He said, did I ever tell you about the young Zode who came to 2 signs at the fork in the road? One said place 1 and the other place 2. So the Zode had to make up his mind what to do. Well, the Zode scratched his head and his chin and his pants, and he said to himself, I'll be taking a chance if I go to place 1. Now that place may be hot. And now how do I know if I'll like it or not? On the other hand, though, I'll be sort of a fool if I go to place 2 and find it too cool. In that case, I might catch a chill and turn blue. So maybe place 1 is the best, not place 2. But then again, what if place 1 is too high? I may catch a terrible earache and die. If place 2 might be the best. On the other hand, though, what might happen if place 2 is too low? I might get some very strange pain in my toe. So place 1 may be the best, and he started to go. Then he stopped and he said, on the other hand, though, though, and for 36 hours and a half, that poor Zode made starts and stops at the fork in the road, saying, don't take a chance, no, you may not be right. Then he got an idea that was wonderfully bright. Play safe, cried the Zode. I'll play safe, I'm no dunce. I'll simply start out for both places at once. And that's how the Zode, who would not take a chance, got no place at all with a split in his pants. Yeah, I see why he's my favorite theologian? Exactly. You gotta take a stand, you gotta make a call, you gotta pick a side. And And then he says, so there's a putting on and a putting off in these next few verses. He said, you didn't come to Jesus through the worldly way, verse 20, not through a worldly road. You got to go through the world, through the word, not the world, through the gospel message and the truth. You got to hear of him. He said in verse 21, like it says in Romans 10, you've got to hear the truth. Somebody's got to teach it. Somebody's got to share it. He'll tell us in verse 14, how then shall they call upon him whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? Just it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring glad tidings of good things. However, they did not all heed the glad tidings, for Israel said, Lord, who has believed our report? So faith comes from hearing from the word of Christ. And so what do we do with all of this? He's encouraging us to take off and to put on. Strip off the habits and the hang-ups of the world. The world wants to dress you in its way of thinking and believing and doing. But we've got to say no. We've got to look and have the filter from the word that the word can give us to go, to see the difference and to recognize the values of the world and reject it and say, I will not go down that way. I'm going to submit to Jesus and have him take off the old robes of sin to change me and to give me life. I want to finish basically with this story. I've read it before, but it's been a while, and maybe some of you haven't heard it, but it just puts it so perfectly. This is the rag man. It's an old story. It's been around, but it really reflects this. He says, I saw a strange sight. I stumbled upon a story most strange, like nothing in my life, my street sense, my sly tongue had ever prepared me for. Hush, child, hush now, and I will tell it to you. Even before the dawn one Friday morning, I noticed a young man, handsome and strong, walking the alleys of our city. He was pulling an old cart filled with clothes, both bright and new, and he was calling out in a clear tenor voice, rags! Oh, the air was foul, and that first light filthy to be crossed by such sweet music. Rags, new rags for old. I take your old tired rags, rags. Now this is a wonder, I thought to myself. For the man stood 6'4", and his arms were like tree limbs, hard and muscular, and his eyes flashed intelligence. Could he find no better job than this, to be a rag man in the inner city? I followed him. My curiosity drove me, and I wasn't disappointed. Soon the rag man saw a woman sitting on her back porch. She was sobbing into a handkerchief, singing and shedding 1,000 tears. Her knees and elbows made a sad X. Her shoulders shook. Her heart was breaking. The rag man stopped his cart. Quietly, he walked to the woman, stepping around tin cans and dead toys and Pampers. Give me your rag, he said gently, and I'll give you another. He slipped the handkerchief from her eyes. She looked up, and he laid across her palm a linen cloth so clean and new that it shined. She blinked from the gift to the giver. Then as he began to pull his cart again, the rag man did a strange thing. He put her stained handkerchief on his own face, and then he began to weep, to sob as grievously as she had done, his shoulders shaking, yet she was left without a tear. This is a wonder, I breathed to myself, and I followed the sobbing rag man like a child who can't turn away from a mystery. Rags, rags, new rags for old. In a little while, when the sky showed gray behind the rooftops and I could see the shredded curtains hanging out, black windows, the rag man came upon a girl whose head was wrapped in a bandage, whose eyes were empty. Blood soaked her bandage. A single line of blood ran down her cheek. Now the tall rag man looked upon this child with pity, and he drew a lovely yellow bonnet from his cart. Give me your rag, he said, tracing his own line down her cheek, and I'll give you mine. The child could only gaze at him while he loosened the bandage, removed it, and tied it to his own head. The bonnet he set on hers, and I gasped for what I saw. For with the bandage went the wound. Against his brow it ran a darker, more substantial blood, his own. Rags, rags, I take old rags, cried the sobbing, bleeding, strong, intelligent ragman. The sun hurt both the sky now and my eyes, and the ragman seemed more and more to hurry. Are you going to work? He asked a man who leaned against a telephone pole. The man shook his head. The ragman pressed him. Do you have a job? Are you crazy? Sneered the other. He pulled away from the pole, revealing the right sleeve of his jacket, flat, the cuff stuffed into the pocket. He had no arm. So, said the ragman, give me your jacket, and I'll give you mine. So much quiet authority in his voice. The one-armed man took off his jacket. So did the ragman, and I trembled at what I saw. For the ragman's arm stayed in its sleeve, and when the other put it on, he had two good arms, thick as tree trunks, but the ragman had only one. Go to work, he said. After that, he found a drunk lying unconscious beneath an old army blanket, an old man, hunched, wizened, and sick. He took that blanket and wrapped it around himself, but for the drunk, he left new clothes. And now I had to run to keep up with the ragman, though he was weeping uncontrollably, bleeding freely at the forehead, pulling his cart with one arm, stumbling for drunkless, falling again and again, exhausted, old and sick, yet he went with terrible speed. On spider's legs, he skittered through the alleys of the city, this mile and the next, until he came to its limits, and then he rushed beyond. I wept to see the change in this man. I hurt to see his sorrow, and yet I needed to see where he was going in such haste, perhaps to know what drove him so. This little old ragman, he came to a landfill. He came to the garbage pits. And I waited to help him in what he did, but I held back, hiding. He climbed a hill. With tormented labor, he cleared a little space on that hill, and then he sighed. He laid down. He pillowed his head on a handkerchief and a jacket. He covered his bones with an army blanket. And he died. Oh, how I cried to witness that death. I slumped in a junk car and wailed and mourned as one who has no hope, because I had come to love the ragman. Every other face had faded in the wonder of this man, and I cherished him, but he died. I sobbed myself to sleep. I did not know. How could I know that I slept through Friday night and Saturday and its night too? But then, on Sunday morning, I was awakened by a violence. Light, pure, hard, demanding light slammed against my sour face, and I blinked and I looked and I saw the first wonder of all. There was the ragman, folding the blanket most carefully, a scar on his forehead, but alive. And besides that, healthy. There was no sign of sorrow or age, and all the rags that he had gathered shined for cleanliness. Well then, I lowered my head, and trembling for all that I had seen, I walked up to the ragman. I told him my name with shame, for I am a sorry figure next to him. And then I took off all my clothes in that place, and I said to him with tear yearning in my voice, dress me. He dressed me. My Lord, he put new rags on me, and I'm a wonder beside him. The ragman, the Christ. I just leave you with this question. What kind of things do I need to get rid of There may be specific things different and vary for each one of us. But what rags do we need to walk away from, get rid of, replace with what God can give us? He will get specific. Come back next Sunday, by the way, because he's going to start for the rest of this chapter and some into the following of some of the specific areas and ways that we can be dressed for success with the Lord. All right. If there are any here that need to respond to the invitation, I encourage you to come and make that known while together we stand and sing.